There is a kind of pain that has no name, not because it isn't real, but because the world never gave you the language to describe it accurately. You have tried. You have opened your mouth in conversations with people who loved you and found that the words that came out were only the surface of something much deeper, much older, much heavier than anything a single sentence could carry. You watched their eyes glaze over slightly, not from cruelty, but from the simple inability to follow you into a depth they had never personally visited. And so you learned to stay at the surface, to give them the version they could handle, to protect them from the weight of the real thing. You became fluent in the language of "I'm fine" when you were anything but. You became an expert at presenting the edited version of your inner world to every room you walked into, while the unedited version continued to bleed quietly in places no one ever thought to look. You learned to smile at exactly the right moment, to laugh at the right volume, to ask people about their lives with a genuine interest that conveniently redirected the conversation away from yours. You became so skilled at appearing whole that most people in your life genuinely believe that you are, and there is a particular loneliness in that. The loneliness of being surrounded by people who think they know you, while the part of you that most needs to be known remains completely unseen. Chosen. This message was not placed in front of you by accident. What led you here today is the same invisible hand that has been guiding every step of your journey, including the steps that felt like they were taking you in the wrong direction, including the seasons that felt like abandonment, including the nights when the silence of God felt less like peace and more like absence. That hand has never once released you, not in the wound, not in the waiting, not in the long and exhausting labor of carrying something heavy without anyone noticing how heavy it actually is. There is something happening right now that your natural eyes cannot perceive, something that began before you found this message. Before you woke up this morning with that familiar weight already settled in your chest. Before the season you are currently navigating even started, God is already healing the part of you that no one else has ever seen. Not the part you present to the world, not the part you bring to conversations or to church or to the carefully constructed version of yourself that you show to the people you trust. The hidden part, the real part, the part that holds the full unedited weight of everything you have never been able to say out loud to another human being. And I want you to understand something before we go any further. This is not motivation wrapped in spiritual language. This is not encouragement designed to make you feel temporarily better before the familiar heaviness returns. This is a declaration, a divine announcement. What has been broken in the secret places of your soul is being restored right now, not when your circumstances improve, not when the people who hurt you acknowledge what they did, not when you finally feel ready right now. In this moment, as these words find the places in you that have been waiting, sometimes for years, to be found. By the time this message is finished, something in you will have shifted, not because of the power of words alone, but because the one who sent them knew with perfect precision what you needed to hear on this particular day, in this particular season, in this particular moment of your journey. He does not miss. He has never missed, and he is not missing now. Let me describe something to you with the kind of precision that only comes from having been in it. There is a specific and systematic way that invisible wounds shape the architecture of a human life. Not dramatically, not in ways that announce themselves or earn sympathy, or get acknowledged in the rooms where people gather to support one another through visible suffering. Quietly, methodically, the way water reshapes stone, not through force but through presence. Through the patient, relentless, imperceptible work of something that never stops moving, even when you cannot feel it. You carry a wound that was given to you in a place where you should have been safe. Maybe it was a home that was supposed to be a sanctuary, but became instead an environment where you learned very early that love had conditions, where tenderness was rationed based on your performance, where your emotions were treated as inconveniences rather than communications, where you discovered through 1,000 small moments rather than one large dramatic event that the cost of being fully yourself was higher than the environment could sustain. And so you began paying a different kind of cost. The cost of disappearing. of editing, of becoming whoever the room needed you to be so that the room would remain stable. You were a child learning to manage the emotional weather of adults who should have been managing their own, and you became very good at it. Dangerously good. So good that it stopped feeling like a survival strategy and started feeling like your personality. Or perhaps the wound came later. From someone you chose with the full capacity of your adult heart. Someone you opened yourself to with the kind of intentional vulnerability that takes years to build the courage for, because you had already learned early that opening yourself came with risk. But you chose to trust anyway. You chose to believe that this person was different, that this relationship was the one that would finally be safe enough to be fully yourself in. And then something happened. Not necessarily something the world would call catastrophic. Not necessarily something you could point to in a single conversation and say, there, that is where it broke. But something shifted. Something was revealed. The safety you thought you had found turned out to be conditional in ways you had not anticipated. And the wound that resulted was not just the pain of what happened, it was the pain of having trusted and been wrong. Of having opened and been hurt in the opening. Of having believed and been shown a reason not to. Chosen. There is something that invisible wounds do, that visible wounds rarely accomplish. They make you their collaborator. They recruit you into the project of your own diminishment. Because when a wound has no witness, when no one saw it happen, when no one validated that it was real, when the people around you would have called it an overreaction or an exaggeration, you begin to prosecute yourself for carrying it. You become simultaneously the wounded, the prosecutor, and the judge. You try the case of your own pain in the courtroom of your own mind, and you return a verdict of insufficient evidence. The wound was not serious enough to deserve attention. You are too sensitive. You are making it bigger than it was. Other people have survived worse and moved on. Why can't you? And in that space, in that relentless internal prosecution, the wound grows roots that go deeper than the original injury ever did. It stops being something that happened to you and starts feeling like something that is fundamentally true about you. The wound becomes identity. The broken place becomes the explanation for everything. Every failed relationship, every professional setback, every moment of inexplicable sadness in the middle of an ordinary day when nothing is objectively wrong. You stop asking what happened to you and start asking what is wrong with you. And that shift from what happened to what is wrong with me is one of the most precise and devastating things that an invisible wound can accomplish. It rewrites your story without your permission. It takes the truth of what God declared about you before you drew your first breath, and it replaces that truth, slowly, convincingly, with the kind of internal logic that is very difficult to argue against, with a counterfeit narrative. A narrative that explains your pain, not through the lens of an attack on a significant destiny, but through the lens of your own fundamental inadequacy. You are not someone who was wounded in the battle for a remarkable purpose. You are simply someone who is broken in ways that cannot be fixed. You are too much in some ways and not enough in others. You are the problem. This is the most sophisticated work that invisible wounds do, and it is why God does not address them casually. It is why the healing He is doing in you right now is not surface work. It is not the spiritual equivalent of a bandage. It is reconstruction. Deep, patient, thorough reconstruction of the foundation that was damaged, so that everything built on that foundation can finally stand with the stability it was always designed to have. Because here is what you need to understand about the wound you carry. It was not random. The specific places where you were broken, the specific relationships that fractured your trust, the specific environments that taught you to make yourself small, the specific moments that introduced the lie that you were not enough, were not the neutral byproduct of a world that is simply difficult and indifferent to human flourishing. They were targeted, not necessarily by the people involved, many of whom were themselves wounded and operating from their own unhealed places, but by a force that understood, long before you did, what was inside of you, what you were capable of, what you were created for, and that force understood that the most efficient way to neutralize a significant destiny is not to destroy the person who carries it. It is to get that person to disqualify themselves, to make them so convinced of their own brokenness that they never fully step into the wholeness that was always theirs. But you are still here. You are still moving. You are still against every internal argument that has been made against you, seeking, and that is not a small thing. That is everything. Here is the truth, that heaven has been waiting for the right moment to plant in the deepest soil of your understanding. God does not heal wounds from the outside in. He heals them from the inside out. And this distinction, this seemingly simple difference in direction, changes everything about how you interpret what is happening in your life right now, and why it is taking the shape that it is taking. The world heals wounds from the outside in. It offers circumstances, resolution, apologies, closure, justice, the acknowledgement of the people who hurt you, the repair of the relationships that broke you, the reversal of the situations that diminished you, the public vindication that would prove to everyone who witnessed your wounding that you were not the problem. And when those external things happen, when life arranges itself in a way that addresses the wound from the outside, there is relief, real relief. But it is temporary, circumstantial. It lasts exactly as long as the favorable circumstances last. And because it never touched the root, because it addressed the surface while the foundation remained fractured, the next wound, or the next difficult season, finds the same broken place and opens it again. God heals from the inside out. He begins in the place that no circumstance can reach, in the foundation, in the root system, in the deepest layer of your sense of self, where the wound first made contact with your understanding of your own worth. He does not wait for the person who hurt you to apologize before he begins the work. He does not require the situation to resolve itself, or for justice to be served, or for the world to finally acknowledge what was done to you. He goes directly to the source, to the place where the lie first took root in the soil of your identity, and he begins his work there. Quietly, persistently, without fanfare, in the places that no one else can access. King David understood this with a clarity that I want you to sit with for a moment. After the most catastrophic moral failure of his life, after a series of decisions that cost him his integrity, his family, the trust of his closest relationships, and his own ability to look at himself honestly in the mirror, he did not pray for God to fix his circumstances first. He did not ask for the consequences to be removed, or for the people he had hurt to forgive him quickly, or for his reputation to be restored before the interior work was done. He prayed something far more radical. He said, "Create in me a clean heart, renew a right spirit within me." He was asking for internal reconstruction before external restoration. He understood, because he had lived enough to know that the outside changes only when the inside has been rebuilt. Chosen here is the first thing I need you to receive today. The fact that you cannot yet see the healing does not mean it is not already happening. The most profound and permanent work God does in a human life is invisible to the natural eye. It happens in the spirit before it manifests in the physical. It happens in the root before it shows up in the fruit. It happens in the foundation before it becomes visible in the structure above ground. You may not feel healed. You may still wake up with the weight. You may still hear the familiar voice that questions your worth in the moments when your defenses are down. You may still flinch in the places where you were broken. None of that is evidence that the healing is not happening. It is evidence that you are in the middle of it, which is precisely where God needs you to be, not pretending it is finished before it is, but present in the process, cooperating with it, allowing it to go as deep as it needs to go, to do the work that only depth can accomplish. Here is the second revelation that I want to anchor in your understanding. Your wound is not your identity, it is your initiation. Every person in Scripture who carried a significant invisible wound was not defined by what broke them. They were initiated through it into a depth of purpose, compassion, and spiritual authority that simply could not have been forged any other way. Joseph did not emerge from the pit and the prison as a man with a grudge and a wound that made him dangerous. He emerged as a man with a wisdom and a largeness of heart that could only have been shaped by suffering that he did not deserve and did not cause. Ruth did not carry her widowhood and her foreignness as permanent marks of diminishment. She carried them as the specific corridor through which she walked into a legacy that would extend for generations. Paul did not ask for the thorn. He asked 3 times for it to be removed. And when it was not, when God said, "My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness," something shifted in Paul's understanding of what the wound was actually for. It was not punishment. It was not evidence of insufficiency. It was the specific instrument through which something in him remained tender enough, dependent enough, humble enough to carry the weight of the revelation he had been given without it destroying him. Your wound is not the end of your story. It is the material from which the most important chapters are being written, not despite what happened to you through it, not around the broken places directly through them. Because the compassion that will make you effective, the real, lived, unperformable compassion that reaches people in their deepest places, cannot be taught in a classroom or downloaded from a sermon. It can only be earned through having been in the dark yourself and having found that God was there too. Chosen. My question for you today is this: what is the wound you have never given yourself full permission to grieve? Not the one you have processed and discussed and made your peace with. The one underneath that one. The older one. The one you buried so efficiently that most days you forget it is there, until something small and seemingly unrelated touches it, and suddenly the response rising in you is so disproportionate to what just happened that it frightens you slightly. That wound. You do not have to name it publicly, but name it to yourself honestly, because the healing deepens the moment the wound is fully named, not performed, not minimized, not framed in a way that makes it more acceptable, but named. Exactly as it is. To the God who already knows exactly what it is and has been waiting with infinite patience for you to finally agree with him about it. Let me show you what someone looks like when God's invisible healing begins to break the surface and become visible in the dimensions of life that other people can see. Not someone who has arrived at a perfect destination, not someone performing wholeness they do not yet fully possess. Someone in the active, real, sometimes difficult and always beautiful process of being made genuinely whole by a God who does not do partial work and does not abandon projects he has started. The first change that happens is almost imperceptible at first. It happens in the relationship with silence. Before the healing reaches a certain depth, silence is dangerous territory. It is the landscape where the wound lives, where the voices that question your worth have the most room to operate, where the absence of external stimulation means the presence of the internal conversation you have been avoiding. You fill silence instinctively, with noise, with the needs of other people, with productivity, with the endless consumption of content that keeps the mind occupied enough that it cannot settle into the discomfort of its own unresolved questions. You move through your days at a pace that makes stillness feel threatening rather than restorative. But as God's healing works its way from the inside out, as the root of the wound is addressed rather than just the surface symptoms, silence begins to change character. It stops being a place of danger and starts becoming a place of resource. You begin to discover that in the stillness, beneath the familiar noise of the wound's narrative, there is another voice, older, steadier, warmer. A voice that has been speaking since before the wound existed, since before you were born, in fact, and that has never once revised its assessment of your worth based on what happened to you or what you did in response to it. A voice that calls you by a name that the wound never used. A voice that describes a version of you that the wound spent years trying to convince you was a fantasy. And the more you learn to sit in that silence without immediately filling it, the more clearly that voice becomes distinguishable from the wound's voice. And the more clearly you can distinguish them, the less automatically you accept the wound's narrative as the authoritative one. This is not a dramatic moment. It is a gradual, quiet, deeply significant reorientation of your inner life. But it is one of the most concrete signs that the healing is moving in the right direction. The second transformation is physical before it is cognitive. There is a particular kind of somatic tension that people who carry invisible wounds live with so constantly and for so long that it stops registering as tension and simply registers as the normal experience of being in their own body. A tightness across the chest that restricts the full expansion of the breath, a guardedness in the shoulders that lifts them slightly toward the ears in a perpetual low-grade bracing. A jaw that is clenched habitually enough that releasing it requires a conscious act of will and feels almost unnatural. Feet that press into the floor with a subtle readiness to respond to a threat that is not currently present, but that the nervous system has learned to anticipate. As healing progresses, as the body begins to receive what the spirit is learning, these patterns begin to shift in ways that are noticeable if you are paying attention. The breath goes slightly deeper without you having to force it. The shoulders soften in moments when they previously would have held. The jaw unclenches in environments that your history had taught you to treat as unsafe. These are not metaphors. They are the literal, measurable, physiological signatures of a soul that is beginning, genuinely, not performatively, to believe that it is safe, that the vigilance can be lowered, that the bracing can be released, that the body no longer needs to hold what the spirit is finally learning to lay down. The third transformation becomes visible to the people around you, often before it is fully visible to you, in the way you begin to receive. People who carry invisible wounds have a relationship with receiving that is complicated in ways they rarely fully articulate, even to themselves. Receiving love requires openness. Receiving help requires the admission of need. Receiving kindness requires the willingness to believe that it is genuine rather than strategic. And all of these forms of receiving require a vulnerability that for someone who was wounded precisely in the moment of their opening is not just emotionally difficult, it is felt in the body as a form of danger. The nervous system that learned that opening leads to pain does not easily distinguish between the people who are safe to open to and the people who are not. It simply closes across the board, as a policy rather than a discernment. But as the healing deepens, as the place in the foundation where the wound first took root is rebuilt, something begins to soften in the place where you guard yourself most carefully. Not recklessly, not without discernment, but with a new capacity to remain present in moments that would previously have triggered an automatic withdrawal. With the ability to let someone's care actually reach you rather than deflecting it before it can arrive. With the willingness to be seen, actually seen, not just the edited version, in moments when being seen feels less like exposure and more like the relief of finally being known. Chosen. There is one final transformation I want to name, because it is the one that changes everything that comes after. Your relationship with your own story begins to shift in a way that reorients your entire understanding of what your life has been for. The wound that once felt like the most defining and shameful thing about you, the thing you worked hardest to hide, the thing that explained everything you believed was wrong with you, begins to look completely different in the light of what God is making with it. It begins to look like material. Like the specific, irreplaceable raw material from which something that could not exist any other way is being built. You begin to understand, not as a concept, but as a lived conviction, that the very places where you were most broken are precisely the places where you have the most to offer. That the specific pain you carried is exactly what qualifies you to reach the specific people who need what you have become. That your wound was never wasted, it was never a detour from your purpose. It was always, from the beginning, the path to it. And when that understanding moves from your head into your bones, when it stops being something you know and becomes something you are, the way you move through the world changes completely. You are no longer someone trying to manage the distance between who you appear to be and who you actually are. You are someone whose actual story, wounds and healing and everything in between, is the most powerful thing about you. Not in spite of the broken places. Because of them, through them, with them, offered honestly to a God who has always known how to make something glorious from the things the world would have discarded. Chosen. I want to finish with this. And I want you to receive it not as the conclusion of a message, but as the beginning of something. You have been carrying something for a very long time that was never designed to be carried alone. Not because you are weak. The fact that you have carried it as long as you have, and continued to function, and continued to love people, and continued to show up, is one of the most extraordinary demonstrations of strength I can imagine. But because the weight of it was always meant to be shared, between you and the God who has been present in your wound from the very first moment it was inflicted, who was in the room when it happened, who heard what was said, and saw what was done, and registered the exact coordinates of the fracture in your foundation, who has been working quietly, persistently, with a love that does not require your awareness to remain constant or your cooperation to remain perfect, to heal it from the inside out. You do not have to be fully healed to be fully used. This is one of the most liberating truths in the entire scripture, and it is one that the wound will fight hardest to keep you from believing. Because if you believe that you must be finished before you are useful, that you must have arrived at some complete and polished version of wholeness before God can move through your story, then the wound has effectively neutralized your assignment indefinitely. There will always be another layer to heal. There will always be another place where the work is not yet done. If completion is the requirement for deployment, you will never be deployed. But God does not work that way. He heals you as He sends you. He restores you as He uses you. He rebuilds your foundation while He is simultaneously constructing the building. The healing and the mission are not sequential. They are simultaneous. And the wound that you are still carrying, the one that is not yet fully healed, the one that still aches in certain moments, is not disqualifying you from what you were made for. It is making you precisely the right person for it. So do not wait. Do not hold your life in suspension pending the arrival of a wholeness that you imagine should feel a certain way before you offer yourself fully. Step forward, exactly as you are, wounded and healing, and real, and imperfect, and full of the specific authority that can only come from having survived something that should have stopped you. And watch what God builds with a life that is offered to Him honestly, rather than presented to Him in a version that has been edited for palatability. The wounds that nobody saw, God saw, every single one of them. The healing that nobody knew you needed, God began it long before you knew to ask for it. And the life that is waiting on the other side of this restoration, it is more than anything the wound ever tried to convince you that someone like you could deserve. What breaks you open is what lets the light in. Chosen and called,